someone who's managed to get his hands, I'm not entirely sure how, on certain documents that are very, very interesting is our politics editor, Lukhanyo. Calata. He hasn't got the report's findings. We'll give him another 5 minutes, maybe he will. What he does have is the President's submission to the report. Lukhanyo, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I'm not going to ask where it came from.
Thank you.
Firstly, the main points that the President says, and all the way through this, where I was going with General Mapisa is Arthur Fraser. What does the President say?
Well, the President came out swinging in his submissions to the Phala Phala, or the independent panel that investigated him on Phala Phala. If I can just read, Stephen, he says, I submit that Mr. Fraser's letter to the DPCI, the Directorate of,
The Hawks.
Yeah, the Hawks, is based purely on hearsay. Its contents do not demonstrate that he has personal knowledge of any matters of which he speaks. He then goes on to say, with respect, Mr. Fraser's letter does not provide proof of his allegations. That's, quite high up in his report when he deals with Mr. Fraser. And I think, obviously, I think it's harsh.
He's basically, and I mean this story, this is one of the issues you've got, and I think General Mapisa is correct to put a little bit of pressure on Ramaphosa. These are questions he has to answer. But I mean, this sort of Fraser-Ramaphosa thing runs all the way through this.
No, it does, Stephen, and I think obviously it brings into question the charges against the President. Because if he's saying that based on the evidence that has been presented, based on the letter that Arthur Fraser sent to the DPCI, it's all hearsay. There is no evidence against him.
One of the other issues is about a conflict of interest, whether or not the President had a conflict of interest, because as a member of Cabinet, and the President is a member of Cabinet in the Constitution, you're not allowed to undertake any other paid work, right? So what does he say about that?
Okay, so this is what he says. It's a bit, okay. He says, I'm entitled to retain assets or financial interests where no conflict of interest would arise if these are declared. The ATM and EFF's proposition that I have misconstrued my obligation in this regard is entirely without merit. He then goes on to, write that much like a shareholder of a company who receives no remuneration, I am not on any payroll other than that of the presidency. This is what he said, obviously, in his submission to the panel. The panel, of course, then had the responsibility to go and investigate whether or not the claims that the President is making here are in fact true.
It's interesting that he names the two parties, the EFF and the ATM. I mean, he's responding directly to them.
Yeah. The ATM, remember, all of this was, the parliamentary process at least, was started by the ATM that had tabled this motion, before the Speaker, for them to be able to investigate these charges against the President.
One of the key figures who's remained virtually silent through all of this is General Wally Rhoda. Now, he is he was, I think, the head of the security detail for the President at the time. What does the President say about him? Because he is a police officer, and his rank and role as a police officer could suddenly become quite important here.
Yeah. So, look, I mean, the President obviously states very clearly that Wally Rhoda was the head of his security. So, and he was someone that was tasked to look after not just his safety, but also the safety of where the President actually then gets to stay. And then he says, 6.1, it is clear that by reporting the security breach and the theft to Major General Rhoda, who holds the rank of Major General in the SAPS, and by specifically requesting that Major Rhoda should attend to the matter, I had no intention of concealing the crime from the SAPS or at all. Furthermore, I did not hunt, his words, I did not hunt for the perpetrators of the theft as alleged, nor did I give any instructions for this to take place.
Sure. I mean, that's a very strong denial. If you remember how the story broke out, unlawful interrogations, things like that, this is a blanket denial of all of that.
Yes, he does. And then at the end, he concludes, Stephen, I'm not going to read the entire conclusion, but what he does say at the end is that I ask that the panel conclude that this matter ought not to be taken any further. Obviously, on the assumption that, the panel would have accepted his denials that there is no evidence against him. So he asked the panel to conclude that this Phala Phala investigation not be taken any further, that the panel must say this is the end of the road after Parliament has discussed this report, for them to then say, okay, well, there's nothing there, we are satisfied the President did nothing wrong, and there's no Section 9 committee that will then probe him for a possible removal.
There's so much going on here. So we have this response, we have the finding, then we'll have the parliamentary debate, and after that there's the small matter of the ANC's elective conference.
Yes.
So the point I'm trying to make is, do you expect that the panel's findings are going to have any impact on the conference? And I've seen lots of different interpretations of this. I think people do have different views on the possible impact on the conference based on the findings of what we should find out later.
Well, I think conference will go ahead. As to whether or not the President will go into conference as he is at the moment, as the front runner, someone who's tipped to come back as, president of the ANC for a second term. Well, that remains to be seen, Stephen, based on what we're likely to find out from this report today. If the panel says the president does have a case to answer for, I struggle to think how the ANC will then re-elect someone who, could potentially be removed from office as the President of the Republic. And I think it would be quite an embarrassment for the African National Congress were that to happen. So it will have an impact. How much of an impact, we don't know yet, but it will definitely have an impact on President Cyril Ramaphosa's bid for re-election.
Lukhanyo, Calata, thank you very much indeed. Our politics editor, his WhatsApps are open if you have anything for him. We are, of course, also thankful to General Bantu Holomisa, leader of the United Democratic Movement, the UDM, for his time on Newsfeed today.